If that crazy old lady calls again, I'll take her phone away. She can't keep bothering us with her nonsense. My daughter's voice bounced off the walls like a slap in the face. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood there with my hands trembling and my soul in pieces, pretending I hadn't heard a thing. Stella was on the phone with her brother. She didn't realize I was standing behind the door with my heart hanging by a thread. Jackson, we have to hurry with the papers. She's starting to get suspicious. Today, she called that friend of hers again, Leocadia. The next time she calls, I'm going to smash her phone. If you're watching this video, please like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching my story of revenge from. I want to know how far it has reached. Do you hear me? We can't let her get any crazy ideas. I stayed silent, absolutely silent. A silence full of dignity, but also of a sadness that hurt to the bone. How did we get here? I, Rosalie, once the heart of this house, the one who wove the bonds, the one who comforted, cooked, and held everything together. Now I was being treated like a nuisance with legs, but I wasn't going to break down in front of them. I took a deep breath, held back my tears, and went up to my room with slow but firm steps. I locked myself in, sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in years, I asked myself, who am I now? It wasn't always this way. My children didn't always look at me with contempt. There was a time, a warm and laughter-filled time, when I was everything to them. Let's go back to the beginning. I fell in love young with a man named Ethan LaRue, a musician, quiet, an old soul in a young body. He played the cello as if he were speaking with God. I, for my part, taught piano classes at a neighborhood elementary school. I truly wonder if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to be quiet to maintain peace? Or would you dare to face everything to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light the way for someone else. We met at a benefit concert in Portland. We fell in love among sheet music and promises of a simple but fulfilling life. The following year, Stella was born, and 3 years later, Jackson. And with them, my mission was also born, to build a home where respect, culture, and love reigned. We didn't have luxuries, but we did have harmony. While Ethan gave concerts and taught at the conservatory, I took care of the house, their homework, and music lessons for neighborhood children. The mornings were filled with music, the afternoons with stories and snacks, the nights with hugs. But happiness doesn't last forever. When Stella was 16 and Jackson was 13, Ethan came down with a rapid, aggressive lung cancer. He was gone in 6 months. It was a cruel, silent winter, full of goodbyes we didn't know how to say. I was left alone with 2 teenagers and a miserable pension. I sold my piano to pay the hospital debts and promised myself that no matter what, my children would never notice their father's absence. I worked as a secretary, as a translator, as a tutor. I never said no to an opportunity to earn a little more. I deprived myself of medicines, of new clothes, of going out so that Stella and Jackson could study at good schools. Stella got a scholarship to study law. She became brilliant, demanding, and competitive. Jackson chose to go into business. He was never very diligent, but he knew how to talk, convince, and promise. He had charm, and I had a soft spot for him. I remember one afternoon Stella was 23 and already working as a paralegal. I brought her a box of hand-knitted sweaters for the new apartment she was sharing with friends. When I opened the box in front of her, I noticed her face harden. "Oh, Mom, couldn't you have brought something more modern? This looks like poor Grandma's clothes." I felt a slap without a hand, but I swallowed, smiled, and said, They're made with thick yarn for the cold, and each one is your favorite color. She hugged me, but without warmth. That was the first crack. Years passed. Jackson got married young and divorced even faster. He never told me much about why, but I later found out he left his wife for a client or several. Stella became increasingly distant. She called once a week, sometimes once a month, and when she came, it was to check my pillbox, my accounts, my papers. You need to get your things organized, Mom. You can't keep living like this. Like this? What did she mean by like this? I lived alone, but with my plants, my books, my memories, my routine. I wasn't bothering anyone. Until the unannounced visits began, the cleaning out of my drawers, the unilateral decisions. One day, without asking for my permission, Stella changed the lock on my house and gave me a new key. "It's for security, Mom." Again, I didn't protest. Again, I remained silent. And then the most painful part began, the isolation. They removed my name from the accounts, changed my primary care doctor, and controlled my appointments. Stella would take my prescriptions to verify them with her trusted lawyer. Jackson installed a camera in my living room, just in case something happens. And one day, without warning, they removed my television because they said it was keeping me from sleeping. Leocadia, an old friend from my youth, called me several times. I didn't answer. I felt ashamed to tell her what I had become, a shadow, until one day I mustered up the courage, picked up the phone, and called her. We didn't talk for more than 10 minutes. I told her very little. She told me, "You're not alone, Rosalie. I went through something similar, and I got out." Stella saw the call history on my phone. That same night, I heard her tell Jackson that she was going to take it away, that it was time to gain complete control over me. And so we returned to the beginning. Listen to the story to the end and tell me what you would do in my place. I didn't sleep that night. I thought about my life, my sacrifices, my dignity, my silences, and I made a decision. I would not stand by with my arms crossed, waiting for someone to save me. I would save myself. I began a subtle, silent, and strategic plan. The first thing was to make a copy of my papers. The second was to seek help. The third was to observe, listen, take notes, record, and above all, to not give a warning. They thought they had me trapped, but they didn't know that after a lifetime of giving myself to others, I was ready to choose myself again. And so it all began. What came next was as painful as it was liberating. The next morning, I woke up with a tight heart. The clock said 6, but I had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, replaying every word Stella had said the night before. I got up slowly, as if each step were a decision. I didn't want to make a sound. I started searching through my things for my most important documents, my birth certificate, deeds, utility bills in my name, and old letters from Ethan that I had once thought about burning but never had the heart to. I carefully wrapped all of it in an old scarf and hid it in a sewing box that I had stopped using years ago. As I did this, a part of me trembled, not from fear, but from determination. Something had changed in me, something that would no longer go away. 3 days passed in which I feigned normalcy. I spoke just enough. I smiled when it was necessary. I made superficial comments so as not to arouse suspicion, but inside, I was counting the minutes, observing, taking note of every gesture. Stella checked my phone every night as if it were her property. Jackson came every other day with silly excuses to bring me bread, check the water heater, or help with the bills. But all he did was inspect my house as if he were looking for evidence that I was losing control. I would nod, thank him, and let him do it, because there was something they didn't know. I already had another phone. I bought it with cash at a small store 2 blocks from Leocadia's house. She accompanied me. She waited outside while I chose the cheapest, simplest one, but with enough to make calls and receive messages. I hid it inside a hollow planter in the backyard, among the dry roots of a plant that I pretended to take care of every afternoon. From there, I began to communicate with her. I told her everything cautiously, without drama, just the facts. Leocadia believed me from the first minute. She didn't hesitate. She offered me her help, and above all, she offered me her silence. A week later, I secretly received a visit from a woman who would change my life. Ines Bell, a senior rights attorney. She was young but had a firm look. Leocadia introduced her to me as a trusted friend. We spoke in the garden while we pretended to be admiring the flowers. I told her how my children had started to make decisions for me without consulting me, how they had removed me from my accounts, and how they had modified access to my house. I told her about the phone, the cameras, and the silent fear I felt every time one of them raised their voice. Ines didn't take notes or record anything. She just listened, and in the end, she said to me with a calm that shook me, "What they are doing to you, Rosalie, is abuse, and there is a way to stop it, but you need to be ready to weather the storm that's coming." I nodded without thinking, because it was no longer just about me. It was about that part of me that my children were slowly killing. My voice. That same night, while Stella was on the phone in the kitchen, I heard her say, "I already got a partial power of attorney. That's enough to move her accounts. A few more papers are missing, but if she signs it, like she always does, we'll have everything ready." My body went cold. I understood then that the urgency was not emotional. It was legal, and they were more advanced than I had thought. I started sleeping with my sewing box under the bed. 2 days later, I faked a fainting spell. It wasn't easy. My pulse sped up as if I were really going to lose consciousness. I fell slowly in front of Jackson just as he was coming in with a bag of fruit. He screamed my name, held me by the arms, and put water on my face. When I opened my eyes, I pretended to be confused. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, almost with genuine concern. "I don't know. I think it was the heat. Or the pills." He took me to my room, laid me down, and while he went downstairs to get me some tea, I got up quickly, went to his jacket, and took his phone. I unlocked it with his date of birth, as I always did, and looked for his conversation with Stella. There were photos of my documents, lists of steps to declare me legally incapacitated, and emails with lawyers. I forwarded everything to my new phone, deleted it from his, and returned to bed before he came back upstairs. I didn't sleep that night. The next day, I went to Leocadia's house with the excuse of bringing her a scarf I had promised years ago. She greeted me with a long, silent hug. We went inside, and I showed her the messages. Inez was also there. She looked at everything carefully, and then said something to me that I will never forget. "With this, we can stop them in their tracks, but you have to be the one to decide how and when. I won't act without your signal." For weeks, I maintained the routine: breakfast with Jackson, forced calls with Stella, and medical visits they organized. Every movement was an act, every smile a mask. But inside, I felt like something was brewing, as if an older, stronger version of me was waking up from a long sleep. One Tuesday, without warning, Stella arrived with some papers. She put them in front of me along with a pen. "Mom, I need you to sign this. It's to update the insurance details, just routine paperwork." I looked at the sheets. There were 7 of them, with technical language and long paragraphs, but between the lines, I understood the essential part. It was a full power of attorney. If I signed that, I would lose everything. My account, my house, my voice. I looked at her, and inside, I broke, but I didn't let her see it. Can I read it calmly? Stella sighed. Of course, but don't take too long. We need it before Friday. I took the papers, put them in a folder, and that same afternoon, I took them to Inez. She scanned them, reviewed them, and confirmed my suspicions. This is serious. If you sign this, you lose everything. That night, I cried like I hadn't since Ethan died, not from fear, but from the open wound of knowing that my children didn't see a mother in me, but a legal obstacle. The next morning, I faked a fall in the bathroom. It wasn't difficult. A little water on the floor and a soft hit on my hip were all it took. Jackson took me to the hospital, and it was there that I planted the final seed. While they were checking me out, I asked to speak privately with the social worker. I told her everything, in a low voice, with pauses, with details. She took notes. She told me that she would start a file, and that I should let her know if I felt I was in danger. I gave her the number of my new phone, gave her Inez's name, and left with a mix of terror and relief. The storm was approaching, but I was no longer the fragile woman they thought they could control. That same night, Jackson checked my phone and found nothing. He frowned. He looked at me out of the corner of his eye. You haven't talked to Leocadia lately, have you? I shook my head. I don't think so. I think she's traveling. He left without a word. 2 days later, my phone disappeared, and in its place, I found a note written by Stella. It's for your own good. You're confused. You shouldn't be talking to people who upset you anymore. I sat down in the dining room chair. I felt the silence like a heavy stone. I closed my eyes and knew with the certainty of a betrayed mother that there was no turning back now. What came next was what sealed my fate and theirs. When I saw that my phone had disappeared, I didn't react immediately. I felt a cold heat run down my back as if my body knew that something serious had just happened, but my mind was still refusing to accept it. I sat alone at the dining room table, with the note in my hand and the silence weighing on me like a sentence. It's for your own good, Stella's note said. That phrase echoed in my head, as if she could disguise violence with tenderness, as if she could erase humiliation with a fake caress. For my own good? Since when was controlling someone a form of caring for them? I didn't dare say anything. I knew that any word I uttered would be used against me. That was the new rule of the game. One misplaced word, one look with too much clarity, and they would label me as unbalanced. So I decided to stay silent, because when your voice is taken away, the first thing you have to do is start listening. I listened to Jackson talking on the phone in the backyard, saying that everything was almost ready, that all that was missing was one more signature. I listened to Stella giving orders on WhatsApp using my name as if it were a failed company. I listened to their steps, their sighs of impatience, their condescending tone every time they spoke to me. And every night, as I went to sleep, I reviewed everything I had hidden in my sewing box. Copies of their messages, printouts of the papers they wanted me to sign, and above all, a small notebook where I had started to write about what I was experiencing every day. Dates, names, phrases, all because I knew that a moment would come when I would have to defend myself, and I wouldn't do it with screams. I would do it with evidence. But the isolation didn't stop there. 3 days later, I tried to go out to the store alone. I had barely gone 2 blocks when Stella appeared in her car. She rolled down the window with contained rage and shouted at me as if I were a disobedient child. Mom, what are you doing out here alone? What if you fall? What if you get lost? You can't go out without telling us. People looked on. A lone, older woman being reprimanded as if she were crazy. I didn't say anything. I got in the car and didn't open my mouth the entire ride. But something inside me died that day. It wasn't pride. It was the illusion that there was still some love behind all of this. A week later, they tried to take me to sign a supposed notarial adjustment. Jackson came to pick me up and said we were going to lunch. But when I saw that the car took another route, I knew he was lying. I didn't say anything. I waited, and when we entered the notary's office with a paper already prepared on the desk, I faked an anxiety attack. I breathed heavily, trembling. I said I couldn't breathe, and I threw myself on the floor. Jackson became flustered and called for help, and in the middle of the chaos, I managed to grab the paper and crumple it, hiding it inside my clothes. No one noticed. They took me to the hospital, and there again, I asked to speak with the social worker. I gave her the crumpled paper. She saved it as evidence. She looked at me with a mix of compassion and respect and said, "They're going too far. This isn't just manipulation anymore. It's abuse." I returned home that night with a bandage on my arm as a precaution. Stella didn't even ask what had happened. She just looked at me with disapproval, as if I were a burden who wasn't cooperating. That was the day I started to be afraid of falling asleep, because I understood that I was alone in that house, alone with them, and that if I didn't act soon, they would end up taking not only my freedom, but my will. Leocadia kept sending me letters under the back garden door. We used codes, fake names, short phrases. The neighbor says the dog started barking loudly again, meant that Inez had gotten more information about the legal process my children were trying to start. "There's no bread at the store today," meant that Stella was constantly watching. I responded with notes hidden in food wrappers. It was a spy game, but one where my dignity was at stake. One day, Leocadia wrote to me, "The friend says it's time for the harvest." I knew then that I had to move fast. I waited for the day Jackson had to leave for a business trip. Stella had also mentioned that she would be spending the weekend at a friend's house. I would be alone for at least one night. It was my only chance. That morning, I left through the back door with my sewing box in my backpack, walking slowly with my heart pounding against my chest. I crossed the alley. I arrived at Leocadia's house, and she was waiting for me with the door ajar. I slept there on her couch for the first time in months without hearing footsteps behind my bedroom door. The next morning, we went with Inez to a local social services office. I reported everything. I brought evidence, showed them the notebook, the crumpled papers, the notes. I cried, but not from sadness. I cried from rage, from helplessness, and from relief, because finally someone believed me. And not only did they believe me, they listened. They initiated a protective procedure. They offered me temporary shelter, but I didn't want to flee. I wasn't going to hide. I wanted to stay in my house because it wasn't just a property. It was the last place where I was still me. So I asked for a special measure: discreet surveillance, scheduled visits from social services, and legal monitoring. They agreed. I returned home with a new folder in my backpack and a renewed voice in my chest. When I arrived, Stella was in the kitchen. "Where were you?" "I went for a walk," I said without fear. "In that outfit, and without telling us." "Do I have to ask for your permission to breathe now?" For the first time, she looked at me not with rage, but with something closer to bewilderment. "You're acting really weird, Mom." "No more than you." And I locked myself in my room. That night, while I pretended to be asleep, I heard Stella talking to someone on the phone. "I think she's getting suspicious." "No, she didn't sign, but she's planning something." "Yes, it could be Leocadia." always meddling. I'll confront her tomorrow. I knew a war was coming, and it was no longer time to hide. It was time to confront. The next morning, Stella showed up with Jackson. The two of them, with faces like they were at a funeral, sat me down at the dining room table. Mom, this is over. We can't leave you alone anymore. You're confused. You're putting your safety at risk. We've decided the best thing is for you to sign these documents and come live with us. Your house is no longer a safe place. And you're a safe place? Don't start with that, Jackson said, raising his voice. We're tired of your mood swings. You're not the same person you were. You need help. And who decides that? We do, of course. We're your children. You're not my jailers, but no more. I got up, went to my room, and came back with the social services folder. I opened it and put the legal copies, the stamps, and the evidence on the table. This is my testimony. This is my right. This is my voice. Stella went pale. Jackson was speechless. If you try to pressure me, manipulate me, or touch my things without permission again, I won't hesitate to take you to court. I've already spoken with lawyers. I've already spoken with the social worker, and I'm not alone. The silence that followed was the heaviest of my life, but for the first time in months, it was I who had created it. They didn't answer me. They left that afternoon without saying goodbye, and I stood there, trembling, but not from fear, from freedom, because the real confrontation was just beginning and I was no longer going to back down. After that confrontation in the dining room, silence became another character in the house. It wasn't a silence of peace. It was the silence of a volcano before it erupts. Stella never brought up the subject directly again, but I noticed her eyes following me more closely. Jackson stopped coming over so often, but when he did, he came with a forced smile and double-edged questions. They tried to feign normalcy, but I was no longer the same, and they knew it. That's why their strategy changed. It was no longer control with threats or direct manipulation. Now they played with guilt, with nostalgia, with memories. One day, I found a box of old photos in the kitchen. Photos of me with them as children, as teenagers, birthdays, vacations, all arranged there as if someone had wanted to remind me that we were once a family, that I once hugged them without fear. I sat in front of the box alone and looked at each image as if it didn't belong to me. It hurt to recognize myself as happy next to them because that no longer existed. And yet, a part of me still loved them. That was the cruelest poison, because when you love someone who is destroying you, confusion becomes a cage. That night, Stella made me a dinner she used to make when I was sad. Pumpkin soup with toasted bread. She left it served on the table with a lit candle. She told me she wanted to talk, but she didn't want it to be a fight. She just wanted me to listen to her. I agreed. I sat down, and for half an hour she cried. She said she didn't know how to handle my new attitude, that she felt alone, that she was afraid something would happen to me, and she wouldn't be able to help me. She said the world outside was cruel and that she just wanted to protect me, that if she was sometimes harsh, it was because of nerves, not malice, that everything she did was because she loved me. It was hard for me to breathe because every word was carefully designed to confuse me, to make me doubt myself. And for a moment, I almost fell for it. But then I saw her glance at her phone as if she were waiting for a signal. And I understood. Nothing was spontaneous. That conversation was planned, rehearsed, cold. Thanks for dinner, I said. It's delicious, but next time, tell me the truth without sugarcoating it. It will be better for me. I got up, leaving half the plate. Her face tensed. She didn't respond. She just blew out the candle. From then on, they stopped pretending. There were no more emotional dinners or nostalgic photos. They returned to silence, but now with a tinge of war. They started treating me like an uncomfortable guest. They stopped telling me about family gatherings. They didn't bring me things from the market that I asked for, and every time they talked on the phone, they did so in a low voice or went out to the yard. But I listened. I listened to everything, and I wrote down every word, every gesture. My notebook was no longer just a refuge. It was my weapon. One afternoon, Leocadia notified me that Inez had gotten a copy of a modified deed that Jackson had tried to register at a local office. He had forged my signature. That was a crime. Inez scanned it and gave it to me on a USB drive. I hid it inside an old doll that I had in my closet, one that Stella hated because she said it was old-fashioned and hideous. I thought, perfect, she'll never look there. Meanwhile, the social workers were still in contact. They visited me once a week, always discreetly, but their faces were getting more and more serious. They told me that passive protective measures were no longer enough, that I should consider a formal lawsuit. But I was afraid because I knew that once I did that, there would be no turning back. It would be an open war. And then what finally pushed me over the edge happened. One morning, I woke up to a strange smell. I didn't know what it was at first, but when I went downstairs, I saw that my sewing room was a mess. The box where I kept my materials was empty, and in the yard, inside a partially burned garbage bag, I saw the remains of charred papers. It wasn't regular garbage. It was my notes, my notebook, my copies. Someone had entered my room while I was sleeping and had tried to erase my history. I knelt in front of the bag with my hands trembling. I felt the air leave my lungs because I understood that now they not only wanted to silence me, they wanted to erase me, as if by destroying my words they could destroy my truth. Leocadia found me like that. She hugged me without saying anything and took me back to social services. This time, I didn't hesitate. I formally filed a complaint with a date and time against my own children, and I felt like I was dying inside as I did it, but also that I was being reborn. That night, the officers came to the house, not to arrest them, but to serve a court order. I was granted legal custody of the property, and Stella or Jackson were prohibited from modifying any document without my presence and approval. Stella screamed. Jackson threatened with lawyers, but the officer was clear. Mrs. Rosalie has rights, and you are under investigation. When they left, I locked myself in my room and cried. But it was no longer from sadness. It was from contained fury, because now I knew my worth. I knew what they had done to me, and I knew I wasn't alone. The next day, I found a handwritten note in my garden. It wasn't from Leocadia. It was from someone else. It said, "What your children did to you is not new. They've been planning it for years. I saw it. I want to help you, but I can't talk yet. Wait for my signal." The paper was unsigned, but the handwriting seemed familiar. Who else knew? Who else had been watching from the shadows? And why were they choosing to come forward now? I saved the note and decided to wait. It was not the time to rush. The next few days were of tense calm. Jackson disappeared. Stella locked herself in her room, only coming out for the essentials. No one spoke to me, and I dedicated myself to reconstructing everything I had lost. I started writing again, printing papers, organizing folders, but I also started making calls to old neighbors, forgotten friends, to people who had once been part of my life and whom Stella had made me cut off. Many didn't answer, others were hesitant, but one just one, said something that froze me. Rosalie, do you remember the nurse who took care of your husband in his last days? The one who suddenly disappeared? You should talk to her. There are things you don't know. And it was as if a door opened inside my head, because in the midst of everything, I had forgotten something essential: the past. My husband died 6 years ago. They said it was a respiratory arrest. He had lung problems, yes, but his treatment was stable. That nurse, Clara, was with us for a month. She was kind, patient, and one day she just left. Stella said we didn't need her anymore, but I never asked why. I never doubted, and now someone was telling me that I should talk to her. Leocadia looked for her. It took a week, but she found her. Clara agreed to see me. We met at a discreet cafe in another neighborhood. "Mrs. Rosalie," she said, lowering her voice, "I could never forget you, but they threatened me. They made me sign a document where I promised not to talk. I saw things. Your husband didn't receive his medication the last week. Someone took it out of the bottle and replaced it with placebo pills. I noticed too late, and when I wanted to tell you, they wouldn't let me in anymore." I felt the world crumble, because if that was true, then my children had not only manipulated me, they had let their father die. "And why are you talking now?" "Because I also have a mother, Mrs. Rosalie, and I couldn't bear to see her live what you are living." She handed me a copy of her old report, hidden for years, and hugged me. I didn't sleep that night because I understood that my story was not just one of emotional abuse. It was one of profound betrayal, of a covered-up crime, and of a past that was just beginning to reveal itself. The nights became longer since Leocadia revealed the truth about my husband's death. Sleeping was no longer an option. My mind wouldn't rest. I went over every detail, every memory, every conversation from those days. I thought about how Stella insisted on being present at every medical checkup, how Jackson prevented me from checking the prescriptions. Everything made sense now. It hadn't just been negligence, it was deliberate. It was a cold decision, a calculated act to eliminate the only obstacle that, at the time, was preventing them from gaining total control of my life. Because my husband, even when he was sick, always defended me. He always stood up to them when they spoke to me with contempt. He was the limit they couldn't cross, and that's why they made him disappear. But now, that truth gave me strength. I was no longer just a hurt mother. I was a manipulated, deceived, and betrayed widow, betrayed by my own flesh and blood. What was at stake was bigger than a house or a document. It was my history. It was my dignity. When Leocadia learned what she herself had told me, she was speechless. But then she looked at me with a sparkle I had never seen before. "Rosalie, this changes everything. This isn't just abuse. This is a crime. And if you prove it, they're not just going to lose control over you. They could end up in prison." I didn't respond, not because I didn't want to, but because the weight of that possibility was crushing my chest. Could I really wish to see my children behind bars? Was that justice or revenge? Days passed, and Jackson came back to the house as if nothing had happened. Dressed in a suit with his manufactured smile, he greeted me with a kiss on the cheek and said, "Mom, I've been busy. I'm preparing a surprise for you, something big. You're going to be proud." I didn't know what to say. I faked a smile, but inside, something told me that this surprise didn't bring good news. That same afternoon, two men came to the house. Lawyers, they said. They presented me with a document. They wanted me to sign a temporary assignment of powers so that Jackson could represent the property in an urgent, supposed bank negotiation. They said it was only for a few days, that everything was in order, that I should trust them. I looked at them and read the document. It had errors, missing clauses, and a notary's signature. "I'm not going to sign this," I said in a firm voice. "And if you want to talk about business, do it with my lawyer." The men looked at each other. One of them sighed. "Mrs. Rosalie, this is a unique opportunity. If you don't sign, you could lose a lot. I have already lost enough, and you're not going to keep stealing from me." I threw them out of my house. Jackson didn't say a word. He just looked at me with pure, raw hatred, as if I had taken something that he already considered his. That night, I reviewed all the documentation I had saved over the years: contracts, wills, letters, and there, among the oldest papers, I found something that shook me: a handwritten letter from my husband, dated 3 months before his death. In it, he asked me that if anything happened to him, I shouldn't trust Stella or Jackson. He said he had noticed changes in their behavior, that they were spying on him, that they were pressuring him to change his will, that he feared for me. That letter was my testimony. His was the voice of a dead man telling me, "Rosalie, open your eyes." I showed the letter to Leocadia. Her eyes welled up. She hugged me, and then, without letting go, she said, "We're going to use this. Don't worry. This time, you're not alone." What followed was a whirlwind. We presented the letter to the district attorney's office. My husband's death case was reopened. An exhumation was authorized. And although it was painful to imagine, I knew it was necessary. Because if there were traces of the altered medications, if there was evidence, then everything would change. Jackson started to be absent more. Stella locked herself in her room for hours, but something told me that they weren't just waiting, they were planning. And then the night of the blackout came. The house lost power around 10 o'clock. It was strange, because it was the only house on the block with that problem. I looked out the window. Everything was dark, absolute silence. I went downstairs with a flashlight. When I got to the kitchen, I heard footsteps in the yard. I approached stealthily and saw a hooded figure next to the fuse box. They were going to cut the cables. I took my phone, called Leocadia, and asked her to notify the police. I didn't scream. I didn't make a sound. I just watched. And when the patrol car arrived, the figure had already fled, but they had left behind footprints, tools, and a note inside the mailbox. "This isn't going to end well for you, old witch." My legs trembled. It wasn't just harassment, it was a direct threat. That same night, the police placed a temporary guard at the entrance of my house, but I couldn't sleep there anymore, not with the fear that something worse would happen. Leocadia offered me to stay with her. I accepted. For 3 days, I took refuge in her house. I kept writing, documenting, and planning, and then fate showed me one last piece of the puzzle. A former colleague of Stella's, a woman named Margaret, called me. She had worked with her at a private clinic where Stella managed part of the administrative files. She told me that for years, Stella had been forging medical reports, that she had even been withdrawing controlled medications using the names of deceased patients, that she was good at it, cold and precise, and that when my husband got sick, Stella brought a box of vitamins that she said he should take without me knowing, because my mother worries too much and stresses out the old man. Margaret gave me a signed statement, and with that, the prosecution decided to move forward. When Jackson and Stella were summoned to testify, their reaction was explosive. They denied everything. They cried. They played the victims. They said I was being manipulated, that someone wanted to separate them from their mother, that I was being used, but they were no longer believed. One morning, while I was drinking coffee on Leocadia's porch, I saw something that left me breathless: a manila envelope with no return address on the gate. I opened it. Inside, there was a copy of an audio recording. The voice was Jackson's, talking to someone on the phone. He said, "If the old woman doesn't sign this week, we're going to have to put something in her tea. Nothing strong, just something to weaken her. That way she won't be able to go and sign anything. We need time." I listened to it 3 times. I couldn't believe it. It was recent, very recent, and it confirmed everything. The prosecutor, upon hearing it, ordered precautionary measures. Jackson and Stella could no longer approach me or the property. The investigation continued, and although they were not yet in prison, the net was closing. But something inside me broke that week, because for the first time, I felt that nothing was left of the children I had raised, the ones I carried in my womb, the ones I hugged when they were scared, the ones I fed, cared for, and protected. They no longer existed. They had become strangers, shadows, monsters with my blood. And it was there, in that emotional crack, that I received the most unexpected call. A calm, paused female voice said to me, "Rosalie, my name is Marion. I'm also the daughter of Frank Miller, and I need to talk to you." I froze. Frank Miller had been my husband's best friend. We had known him since we were young. He had disappeared from the country, and now this woman was telling me she was his daughter, that she had information, that her father had been a witness to very dark things, that someone had wanted to silence him, that they had threatened him, and that before he died, he asked her to find me. "What your children did," she said, "didn't start with your husband. It started much earlier, and there are more people involved. You have to know, because it's not just your family. It's something bigger, something that if you don't stop now, it's going to keep destroying lives." And just like that, my story stopped being just mine, because behind my children, there were others, other names, other victims, and an even deeper truth. I couldn't close my eyes that night. Marion's voice resonated in my mind with every heartbeat. "This didn't start with your husband." That phrase haunted me like an echo, dragging itself through the corners of my memory, awakening questions I had never dared to ask. What else was behind it? What could be darker than what I already knew? What ancient secrets were hidden under the rug of my family history? The next morning, without thinking twice, I called Marion. I asked her to meet me in a public place, far from my house, away from the lurking eyes of my children. She accepted. We chose a discreet cafe on the outskirts of the city. When she arrived, her presence imposed a strange silence. She was tall, with dark hair and gray eyes. She seemed to have weathered many storms, as if her skin bore the scars of the past. She sat down across from me and looked at me for several seconds before speaking. "My father, Frank, was silenced," she began. "He didn't die of natural causes. He was killed. And I know who did it." I swallowed, not knowing if I wanted to hear more, but Marion didn't stop. She took a folder out of her bag and placed it on the table. Photos, letters, recordings. Among them was an image that froze my blood. It was a photo of Frank in what looked like an old office. Next to him was Stella. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, and they were both smiling in front of a whiteboard full of diagrams, charts, and names. "What is this?" I asked, confused. "My father discovered a medical corruption network. They were manipulating medical records, certifying fake deaths, diverting medications to private clinics that operated without a license. And your daughter was part of it." My throat closed. The world spun. Marion continued. "He told your husband about it. He wanted him to help him report it. But right then, your husband got sick. The visits between them became secret. There was fear. There was tension. When Frank disappeared, I was 16 years old. I never saw him again. A few months later, I received a handwritten letter from him. It said that if one day his death seemed suspicious, I should look for you, that you could help me understand. She showed me the letter. I recognized Frank's handwriting. It was authentic. It said things that only someone close to our family would know. And on the last line, a warning. Don't trust Jackson. He's more involved than he seems. My body was paralyzed. Jackson, him too. Since when? How had I not seen it coming? Marion handed me the folder and said goodbye with a phrase that was etched in my chest. Don't give up, Rosalie. This isn't just for you. It's for all those who didn't have a voice. I left that meeting with a new determination. It was no longer just about getting my house back or clearing my husband's name. It was about justice, about bringing everything that had been hidden for years to light. When Leocadia saw the folder, she went pale. She knew we were entering dangerous territory, but she didn't hesitate. She helped me organize all the information, digitize it, and deliver it anonymously to a journalist she knew. We wanted to ensure that if something happened to us, the truth would continue its course. It was a tense week. The police were still investigating my husband's exhumation. The toxicology report had not yet arrived, but the days seemed to weigh more heavily, as if time itself knew that something big was about to explode. And then the fire came. It was in the early morning. A short circuit, they said, but the police knew it was arson. Leocadia's house was almost completely burned down. Fortunately, that night she had gone to visit a sick cousin. I stayed in a nearby guest house as a precaution, but the message was clear. They were telling us to back off, to stop digging, that the next fire could reach us. Leocadia, through tears, told me, I lost everything, my photos, my books, my papers. But I'm not going to leave you alone, Rosalie. This won't stop me. She hugged me tightly, and I knew we were more united than ever. The next day, I received an envelope with no return address. It contained a single sheet of paper, a phrase written in black ink. Secrets die in silence. You decide if you die with them. It was no longer a veiled threat. It was a sentence. I ran to the district attorney's office, demanded protection, and was assigned a temporary escort. But I knew that wouldn't be enough. The network we were touching was deeper, wider. And then came the final straw. One night, while I was looking through old papers from the clinic where Stella worked, I found a receipt signed by Jackson. A payment for a consultation. The date coincided with the time my husband had been diagnosed, and the strangest thing was that the sender of the payment was a ghost pharmaceutical company. I consulted with Marion. She investigated. The pharmaceutical company was registered under the name of a straw man who, according to records, had died 4 years ago. It was all a facade, a cover-up. We presented the information to the district attorney, and this time, the prosecutor did not hesitate. He ordered the preventive detention of Stella and Jackson for obstruction of justice, forgery of documents, and attempted murder. When the agents arrived, Stella screamed like a madwoman. She said it was all a mistake, that they were persecuting her, that I was a crazy old woman being manipulated by envious people. Jackson didn't say a word. He just looked at me with an empty gaze, like someone who no longer has a soul. When I saw them handcuffed, I didn't feel joy. I felt pity, a deep pity, because despite everything, they were my children, and somewhere in their childhood, there was love, there was laughter, there were promises of a future. What happened along the way? When did the thread break? I went back to my house. It still smelled of dampness and confinement, but it was mine. I walked through every corner, touched the walls, took a deep breath, and in the silence, I felt a strange peace. For the first time, I wasn't afraid. I knew the battle wasn't over, that there would still be trials, evidence, and doubts. But I was no longer the same. I was no longer the submissive Rosalie who kept quiet. I was a woman who had awakened, wounded, yes, but standing. That night, as I was making myself some tea, the phone rang. It was Marian. Her voice was trembling. Rosalie, I found something else. Something you need to see. Something about your granddaughter. I froze. My granddaughter? I asked, not understanding. Yes, she said. Stella had a daughter more than 20 years ago. She gave her up for adoption, and I think the girl was part of the same system your husband tried to expose. I think she was also a victim. The air left my body. A granddaughter, a life I didn't know. A new hidden chapter. Marian promised to bring me all the documents the next day. I hung up the phone with my heart racing, and at that moment, I understood that the story was not yet over, that the roots of the pain extended beyond what I had ever imagined, and that the truth still had more faces to reveal. The sun rose without me being able to sleep. I spent the night awake, sitting in front of the window, watching the darkened sky slowly turn red, as if the sun were bleeding its way out. Marian would be here in a few hours, and with her, the possibility of a truth I had never even dared to imagine. A granddaughter, a hidden child, a life snatched from silence. How had Stella been capable of keeping something like that quiet? How was it possible that I, her mother, didn't notice it? It was as if every day I discovered a new betrayal. Every memory I had left of my children became more false, more poisoned. I made myself a strong coffee. My hands were trembling. The house was silent, but it wasn't the same silence as before. This one was heavy, dense, as if the walls were listening, as if the echo of all the accumulated secrets was whispering to me from the shadows. Marian arrived on time. Her face was haggard, her eyes sunken, but her determination had not lessened a bit. She carried a folder under her arm, the same one she had held like a shield in our previous meetings. "Rosalie," she said as soon as she entered, "what I'm going to show you is not going to be easy to digest, but you need to know. You need to understand what your daughter covered up for so long." I nodded in silence. I sat down across from her, my palms open on the table, as if with that gesture I was giving her permission to open me up completely. Marian placed several sheets of paper on the table. There were birth certificates, adoption forms, medical notes, and in the center, a worn photograph of a girl around 5 years old with dark hair and a look of immense sadness. "Her name is Camila," Marian said. "She was born in a rural clinic, far from the official registry. She was given to a private institution that pretended to be a temporary home, but in reality, it was a front for unauthorized medical experiments." I didn't understand. I felt a cold chill on the back of my neck. Marian pointed to a report. It was an anonymous complaint written by a repentant nurse. It detailed invasive procedures, tests with experimental drugs, children subjected without consent to therapies with irreversible consequences, and among the names listed was Camila. "She was treated like a guinea pig, Rosalie," Marian continued. "When she was 7, she escaped from that clinic. She was rescued by a nun who took her to a convent. She lived there until she was 15. Then she disappeared. No one ever heard from her again." The void that opened up inside me was unfathomable. A granddaughter, a child used, manipulated, destroyed. And I didn't know. Here I was, fighting for a house for my name, while she was living in hell in silence. "Are you sure she's Stella's daughter?" I asked, almost in a whisper. Marion took out a DNA test. A comparison with Stella's biological remains, taken from a hospital sample years ago. The blood doesn't lie. Camila was part of my family, part of a broken history. Marion took my hand. There's something else. I know where she might be. An NGO that works with victims of these kinds of networks identified her 3 years ago. She was using another name, but the physical scars and the data matched. She lives alone in a rural area. She doesn't trust anyone. She doesn't want to talk to strangers. I offered to go. I needed to see her, to feel that at least one part of that story could be repaired. Marion contacted the NGO. They agreed to facilitate the meeting under strict conditions. I couldn't go with escorts. I couldn't record anything. Just one visit. Just one attempt. We left in the early morning. The journey was long. Mountains, dirt roads, a sky that seemed to be suspended over our heads. We arrived at a small cabin hidden among trees. Outside, there was a fence with rusty wire. Marion stayed in the car. I approached alone. I knocked on the door gently. It took several minutes for it to open, and then I saw her. Camilla was tall. Thin, with a deep scar on her neck. She had my husband's eyes and the look of someone who has survived many wars. "Who are you?" she asked, without opening the door all the way. "I'm Rosalie," I answered. "Your grandmother. I didn't come to ask for anything. I just wanted to see you, to know that you're alive, that you exist." Her face contorted. She didn't respond, but she didn't close the door. She let me stand there, talking to her from the threshold. I told her everything about Stella, about her grandfather, about what I had discovered. She didn't cry, she didn't move, but her hand on the door was trembling. After a while, she said, "I don't want to go back to that world. Don't look for me again. I survived once. I don't know if I could do it again." I nodded. I didn't insist. I left her a letter, a phone number, a promise. I wouldn't force her to do anything, but if she ever wanted to talk, I would be there. I went back to the car with a heavy heart. Marion didn't say anything. We hugged. That trip didn't close any wounds, but it opened a new possibility. The return home was silent. When I arrived, I was met with unexpected news. The prosecutor handling the case against my children had been replaced. "Administrative reasons," they said. But I knew it was another maneuver, another attempt to silence the truth. Without wasting any time, I sought out the journalist who had received the documents. He told me that someone had tried to buy his silence. They offered him a fortune, but he refused. And in retaliation, his wife had received threats. "Rosalie, this is no longer just a case of corruption," he told me. "This is a network that has tentacles all over the country. Politicians, doctors, lawyers. If we're not careful, they'll destroy us." I asked him to publish everything with names, dates, and evidence. I told him that if I died tomorrow, I wanted to at least leave an echo that they couldn't silence. The article came out a week later with a red headline: "The Silence Network: How a Family Controlled the Life and Death of Hundreds of People." The impact was immediate. New investigations were opened, doctors were arrested, clinics were closed, and there were protests. The networks exploded, but so did the retaliation. Marion was followed. Leocadia received an anonymous call. "Tell Rosalie to shut up, or we'll shut her up for her." I was no longer afraid. The fire in my chest was stronger than any threat. I had come too far. I had lost too much. I wasn't going to stop. One night, while I was looking through old letters, I found one from my husband, Owen. I had never seen it. It was hidden inside a cookbook. It said, Rosalie, if you're reading this, it's because I'm no longer here. I want you to know that I loved you until the end and that I fought to protect what we built. Our children are lost, but you can still save something. Don't let them silence you. The truth always finds a way. I cried like I hadn't in years, like a child, like a mother, like a widow who finally understood that her pain had a purpose. The next day, I went to the district attorney's office. I sat down across from the new prosecutor, looked him directly in the eyes. I'm not going to be quiet. I'm not going to hide. If you don't do your job, I'm going to report you too. He looked at me uncomfortably, but he agreed to reopen the case under federal supervision. I knew I had him cornered. It was no longer just Rosalie. It was the voice of many, public pressure, the truth growing like a crack in a rotten wall. That night, I dreamed of Camilla again. She was in a field surrounded by flowers. She smiled at me, and in her eyes, for the first time, there was no fear, only hope. I woke up with a certainty. There were still battles to be fought, but for the first time, there was also a light, a path, a possibility of redemption. The morning began with a strange, almost solemn silence. The house, despite all that had been lived through, had something different in the air, as if every wall knew that something was about to break completely, as if they were holding their breath. I got up early, long before the birds began to sing. I walked through the house in silence, feeling every crack in the floor as if it were an open wound from the past. On the dining room table were piled the documents that Marion had meticulously organized: evidence, testimonies, photographs, bank records, medical reports. Everything was ready for the final hearing. Stella had been summoned to testify, and for the first time, she couldn't evade justice. The case had become impossible to hide. Camila, firm at my side, held a notebook where she had written everything she remembered, every fragment of memory she had recovered with pain and effort. Leocadia, tireless, had managed to contact a prosecutor who, although fearful, was willing to take the case to its final consequences. The day before, Jackson had tried to flee. They caught him at the border with false documents. He had a suitcase full of dollars, passports, and a list of names. Some were accomplices. Others were targets he planned to eliminate. He was arrested and taken into federal custody. His capture marked a point of no return. I knew that the empire my children had built was crumbling, but the hardest part was yet to come, facing them face to face. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, victims, officials, curious onlookers. Everyone wanted to see the outcome of a story that had shaken the foundations of society. I sat in the front row with Camilla on my right and Marion on my left. Leocadia stood like a sentinel. When Stella entered the room, a murmur went through the crowd. She was impeccable, as always, dressed in white, as if she wanted to project a purity she never had. She walked with her head held high, but her eyes were searching for something. When they met mine, there was no fear or rage, just a void. The prosecutor began his argument with force. He listed every crime, presented the evidence, and exposed the names. Stella remained silent, without blinking. When it was time for the testimonies, they called Camila. She went up to the stand, visibly nervous, but with a determination that filled the room. She spoke with a trembling voice at first, but with each word, she grew stronger. She told what she remembered, what she had felt, the pain of not knowing who she was, of having been used as an experiment. She showed her physical and emotional scars. The room fell silent. Some people were crying. Stella looked away for the first time. I felt my heart break when I saw my granddaughter, so young with so much suffering, carrying the weight of a truth she should never have known. Then it was my turn. I went up to the stand slowly, each step loaded with years of silence, guilt, and pain. When I sat down, I looked at her directly, not with hatred, but with sadness, and I began to speak. I told them what it was like to raise a brilliant but emotionally empty child. How I ignored the signs, how I justified her behavior, how I allowed power to corrupt her. I talked about the moment I knew I had lost her and how I decided that I was no longer going to lose my granddaughter. I didn't ask for compassion. I didn't ask for justice. I asked for memory. That what had happened would not be forgotten, that it would never be repeated. The judge listened to everything carefully. The evidence was irrefutable. Stella's defense tried to argue emotional instability, childhood traumas, and family pressure, but it was useless. The verdict was clear: guilty of conspiracy, illegal experimentation, institutional manipulation, money laundering, and multiple crimes against the integrity of minors. The sentence: life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. Stella didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just turned to me and said, "You were always weak. That's why they destroy you. That's why the world walks all over you." Then she was escorted out of the courtroom. Jackson was also convicted, but his trial was faster. He tried to negotiate, to give up more names in exchange for a reduced sentence, but it was too late. His life, built on the pain of others, was collapsing. Days later, I received a letter. It had no return address, but I recognized Stella's handwriting. It was short. A single old line, "The truth doesn't save you. It just leaves you alone." I burned it without reading more, not because it hurt me, but because I no longer cared. I had survived the worst. I had saved Camila. I had recovered my voice, and that was enough. The case became a symbol. Other victims started to talk. More investigations were opened. Several officials were fired. The clinics involved were permanently closed. A new victim protection program was approved. Camilla started intensive therapy, not to forget, but to learn to live with what she remembered. She moved in with me for a while. We shared silences, cups of coffee, and peaceful sunsets. From time to time, she would wake up screaming, and I would be there, holding her hand, telling her that she was safe. Marion and Leocadia continued to work together, offering legal support to other women. The journalist published a book with all the details of the case, and part of the profits were donated to the victims. I went back to my garden. I planted flowers, pruned trees, and painted the fence, not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to rebuild. One day, while I was watering the plants, Camilla came up to me with a shy smile. "Grandma, I want to study psychology," she said. "I want to understand what they did to us, and I want to help others." I hugged her. For the first time in a long time, I felt that the future was not a threat, but a promise. My story did not end with a trial or with revenge. It ended with a decision: to no longer be silent, to no longer accept silence as punishment. It was a story of horror, yes, but also of resistance, of memory, of dignity, and above all, of love. A love that, although broken, I knew how to fix, that although wounded, I chose to heal. Because sometimes the most important wars are not won by destroying the enemy, but by surviving them. And I have survived with scars, with losses, but also with truth. And that truth, like a seed, is beginning to bloom. The names and places in this story have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. We do not share this to judge. but in the hope that someone will pause and reflect on how many mothers are silently suffering within their own homes. I truly wonder, if you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose silence to preserve peace? Or would you dare to confront everything in order to reclaim your voice? I long to hear your thoughts because every story is like a candle that can light the path for someone else. I firmly believe that God always blesses and that courage leads us toward brighter days. As we close, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I am certain they will surprise and inspire you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.